Welcome to Economic Development Unravelled. The transformation of China from one of the poorest, abject poverty-stricken nations in the world to one of the wealthiest and having the second largest economy in the world is nothing short of a miracle. Today, China is already part of the upper middle income group as per the World Bank classification. Also, China is currently the second largest economy behind the United States and will very soon overtake the US to become the largest economy in the world. This video takes a deep dive into the economic transformation of China, covering the major elements of the story. We'll take a detailed look into the actions by the Chinese government and the reasons behind those actions. We'll also cover the larger story at hand that enabled the Chinese miracle. And most importantly, we'll look into the ultimate causes for what led to the rapid transformation of the Chinese economy using the latest research in economics. If you are really interested in finding out how China succeeded, please do watch until the end. The ultimate secret behind the incredible Chinese miracle begins to come to life only at the latter part of the video. Before we understand China's rise, we need to understand the concept of economic development. Economic development means adding more new wealth to the existing wealth stock of a nation. New wealth comes from making new capital investment. Creating new capital means the nation has to build new factories, housing, vehicles, highways, railways, and airports. Rapid economic development means making those new capital investments every year but at a much faster rate for at least 30 years straight. How much faster? Let's look into China's economic data. Looking at 35 years of China's rapid growth starting from 1981 to 2015 all the way. We see that China has made gigantic annual investments, from tens of billion US dollars in 1980s to trillions of US dollars in 2010s. But what China had managed to do is not easy. In order to make large new capital investments, a nation requires large volume of new savings. Well, let's look at China's savings during that same period. China had managed to create a high portion of its national income into savings, going from below 20% in the early 1980s to all the way above 40% in 2015. Understanding what China had managed to do and how they had done that takes us into the economic wilderness that economists had miserably failed to provide answers. However, by utilizing the latest breakthrough in economics, we'll get out of that cluelessness and come to reckon with the precipitous rise of the Chinese economy. Starting in 1985, China moved away from the capital-intensive heavy industry, the focus of the communist era up until then, to consumer goods, light manufacturing industry for exports. The government directed the national resources, deploying its largest resource available, skilled and semi-skilled labor force, to create value for exports and then to use those export earnings to pay for importing capital goods. Additionally, the state mobilized potential savings into state-controlled banks, built infrastructure, provided product material inputs through state-owned upstream firms, supplied and expanded energy production. Light industry manufacture exports boomed throughout until the 1997 Asian financial crisis hit the importing countries hard. China's limited access to foreign markets saturated by the end of the 1990s. At the start of the new millennium, with a strong light manufacturing industry already in place, the government overhauled heavy industry. The government restructured the state-owned heavy industry firms under the new leadership of State-Owned Asset Supervision and Administration Commission, SASAC. SASAC was created to manage the state-owned enterprises, appoint top executives, and approve key decisions such as stock sales and mergers. China had thriving businesses in light and heavy industry. The country also had an excellent urban infrastructure to support and expand domestic manufacturing. It had realized the opportunity after it gained membership to the World Trade Organization, WTO, in 2001. Two things happened since China joined WTO. First, the light industry manufacturing businesses in China massively expanded the production levels of consumer goods to supply to new foreign markets. Second, with access to the developed nations, the heavy industry businesses in China deployed resources, capital, and labor, acquired technology and manufacturing capabilities, and began one of the greatest expansion of the production of capital goods, which includes both capital machinery and capital equipment. Chinese product exports boomed since 2001. The country's hunger for raw material meant soaring global prices for key production inputs such as Brent crude, coal, and iron ore. Gold and aluminium. Copper, lead, and zinc. Nickel and tin. As part its terms of accession to the WTO, in return, the country agreed to slash import tariffs on foreign goods in phases. In the new century, China vastly increased its focus to build heavy industry, led by the state-owned firms, foreign, local joint ventures, and wholly foreign invested firms. On the back of light industry manufactured exports and booming high-tech processing exports, and this time on a global scale, China directed vast resources to capital machinery and capital equipment industries. Product exports boomed throughout the first decade of the 21st century. While China exports surged, the nation continued to import raw material it didn't produce itself enough and the top-grade machinery and equipment its domestic producers lacked the skill to make. Now, let's look at the Chinese exports and imports of the capital goods segment-wise for the first 15 years since the nation joined WTO, that is from 2001 to 2015. The first segment is capital machinery. In this segment, we'll cover the trade data related to all these machines listed below, one by one. For comparison, let's also look at imports data placed next to exports data for both machines and its parts as well under each machine category in the following manner as shown in this sample chart. Exports of boilers and steam turbines. Exports of engines and turbines. Exports of transformers. Exports of motors and generators. Exports of construction equipment. Exports of agricultural machinery. Exports of food manufacturing machinery. Exports of printing machinery. Exports of textiles machinery. Exports of machine tools. Exports of electromechanical appliances. Now let's turn to the second segment, capital equipment. Exports of railways and tramways. Exports of vehicles. Exports of vehicle parts. Exports of aircraft and its parts. Exports of ships and boats. Exports of optical and precision instruments. We can clearly see from all this trade data that China's heavy industry exports boomed since it joined WTO, while the nation continued to import capital machines throughout this time in accordance with the make and model of its domestic manufacturing output. China is fortunate in the sense that the country sits close to three of the most successful late industrialized nations. The incredible achievements of Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan after the end of the Second World War were striking for China. Their growth during the latter part of the 20th century was nothing short of unprecedented. Rapid industrialization strategies, pioneered by Japan, perfected by South Korea and Taiwan, all without the benefit of economic literature and to the most extent without the hand of economists in the implementation, were at the shores of China's neighbors waiting to be discovered. The large-scale depletion of U.S. manufacturing since the beginning of the new millennium has to do to a great extent with the U.S. firms relocating manufacturing abroad and mainly to China. The relatively low cost of labor in China combined with the country's excellent public infrastructure lured many U.S. corporations of all kinds into moving their manufacturing to the industrial heartland of China. In order to secure frontier technology from the industrial corporations in foreign nations, China used various strategies to that end. To those companies looking to enter and sell in China, the nation imposed conditions that proved extremely beneficial. It required foreign firms to form joint ventures with Chinese companies before they can start doing business in China. By doing so, foreign multinational companies managed to gain access to the growing Chinese domestic market. China's industrialization has been a gigantic effort in terms of scale seen unlike anywhere. But when compared to its neighbors, it is one of a subpar effort in that the China's industrial base benefited from a depletion of US manufacturing, which then relocated to other places including China. China emerged as the leader in consumer goods, an industry in which many US firms folded in the face of stiff competition. Since opening and reform, the Chinese government faced foreign currency shortages. The government directed domestic manufacturers to export by implementing the export tax rebate policy in April 1985. The strategy was to build up foreign exchange resources to pay for capital goods imports. In 1991, the export subsidy, wherein the exporter received back more than the exporter paid as a tax, was abolished. The then existing tax system proved ineffective in the face of double taxation. Thus, in 1994, the Chinese government abolished the old tax system and implemented a new value-added tax, VAT. The basic rate of VAT tax was set at 17% applicable to all products, both tradable goods and non-tradable goods. In other words, all goods produced in the country attracted a VAT tax of 17%. VAT is an indirect tax imposed at each stage of the production process based on the amount of value added at that stage. As it is an indirect tax similar to sales tax, the WTO allows its member countries to return to businesses up to the full amount any VAT levied on exported goods. That is why VAT rebates are also referred to as export VAT rebates. In the beginning, in order to incentivize the manufacturers to export, the Chinese government set a VAT rebate rate of 17% for export goods. In other words, producers who exported received a full refund of the 17% VAT tax only on the output that was exported to foreign nations. Any output sold in the domestic market didn't receive refunds from the government. Thus, the Chinese government established a strong incentive for manufacturers to pursue exports at any cost. Following that, in order to influence what the nation's manufacturers exported, a non-uniform system of export VAT rebate system was implemented. Meaning, the Chinese government wanted to design what the nation's exports basket looked like. For example, when the government decided to target high-technology goods for export, highest VAT rebate rate was given to that industry. In other cases, to dampen the exports of goods whose manufacturing causes significant environmental pollution, a much lower VAT rebate rate was given to those industries. Theoretically, how VAT rebate policy affects trade is straightforward. The two economists, Feldstein and Krugman, showed that when a VAT system is subjected uniformly to all products produced in a country and the goods that are meant for exports do not receive a complete rebate as opposed to the rest of the products, that system acts as an export tax on those goods affecting the trade volume of those goods. In extension, this implies, for a given domestic VAT rate, there is a positive relationship between VAT rebate rate and export volume. Thus, the VAT rebate policy for exports was the mechanism by which the Chinese government directed domestic manufacturers to export. The state, by varying the levels of VAT rebate rate on a wide variety of goods headed for export, effectively controlled the performance of exports. Moderate adjustments to VAT rebate rates had significant repercussions on the exported volume. The strategy was to increase the VAT rebate rate for those classes of product exports that the state wanted their export volume and the production capacity of those industries in the economy increased, and to decrease the VAT rebate rate for those classes of product exports that the state wanted their export volume decreased. Even as China slashed its import tariffs, in a timely manner as agreed, after joining the WTO, the country still managed to accomplish the task of restoring protection to its industry selectively through alternative policy mechanisms. Evidence suggests that China increased export restrictions on certain products produced by the upstream industries by imposing export taxes, that is, in the form of lesser VAT rebate rates, thereby restoring some pre-WTO protection to downstream industries that export. Theoretically, by imposing export taxes on raw materials, a wedge between domestic prices and world prices can be generated, thus supporting domestic downstream firms by providing them with an input cost advantage. The US and the EU have twice taken China to the WTO's dispute settlement mechanism over its export restrictions on raw materials, claiming that the capital goods industries in China have been provided an unfair advantage. However, VAT rebates are allowed under WTO rules but only up to full rebate. In contrast, rebates more than the amount of VAT collected amounts to subsidies, which is illegal. Overall, VAT rebate policy for incentivizing businesses to export was an important mechanism the Chinese government deployed to influence the way businesses reacted. There are some important questions concerning the rise of China. What has driven the Chinese economic miracle? How did the nation manage to create such high savings year after year that allowed the East Asian nation to make such gigantic annual domestic investments continuously for more than 35 years without a hiccup? Why do other developing countries like India, with equally ambitious plans to develop rapidly, have lagged China? While mainstream economists have faltered for decades trying to understand the Chinese miracle, it is only recently with the help of the groundbreaking research has our understanding of the miracle nations including China evolved to new and never been attained heights. When we check the average savings rate of the wealthy industrialized nations, the USA, the UK, Germany, and France, we see that their average rates over such a long period do not go beyond 10% or slightly above in the case of Germany. Whereas the average rates of the miracle nations, Taiwan, South Korea, and China during their rapid growth period went beyond 20%. China even boasts a breathtaking 30% average savings rate between 1981 and 2015. How can underdeveloped nations like China build so high savings rate while the early industrialized nations such as the USA and the UK could not? It all goes back to certain basic principles that economists had dearly missed. It starts with something very simple. Consider, for instance, a personal scenario. During any given period, when you spend 70% of your income, the remaining 30% of your income is obviously your net savings, right? Surprisingly, a nation's savings doesn't work like that. How and why is beyond simple. There has been an extraordinary development in economics recently. It has been discovered that nature has capped the annual savings rate of a nation to just 10% of its national income. Which means, a nation, for example, has $100 billion in national income, it can have savings no more than $10 billion, just 10% of its annual income. If that's the case, then how come Taiwan, South Korea, and China have managed annual savings rates well beyond 10% and up to 45% for decades? The recent research has also made a stunning discovery that a nation can go beyond the 10% savings limit through international trade. How is that possible? Let's understand how it all works. A nation has to export a lot of goods to foreign nations and use that exchange dollars to import capital goods. Since the total new savings of nation is nothing but its total new investment, its savings go up when it imports capital goods. The Northeast Asian nations, Taiwan, South Korea, and China have implemented economic policies that incentivized exports above anything else. They placed very high import duties on consumer goods, which effectively meant whatever the foreign exchange the nation's exporters earned was made available for importing only capital goods. Here's how it works out. The exporters earn US dollars from foreign nations in return for shipping goods to those nations. The exporters then take the dollars to the bank and exchange for national currency. The importers in the country, on the other hand, exchange national currency with the bank for US dollars so they can pay foreign nations in US dollars and import capital goods, such as machinery and equipment. All three nations, Taiwan, South Korea, and China, have had massive exports. They exported a large percent of their GDP to foreign nations, and used the export dollars to import capital goods. All this means, we should see a correlation between exports rate and savings rate of these nations. Why? Because the more an underdeveloped nation exports, the more it will have the capacity to import capital goods to increase investment, and in turn, its savings. Let's see if this is true for Taiwan. Taiwan's savings rate surged as the island nation's exports rate increased. And the same goes for South Korea. Its savings rate surged as and when its exports rate increased. And same for China. The nation's gigantic savings buildup is a result of its export might. Once exports rose, the capital goods such as machinery and equipment it imported automatically raised the nation's savings rate. The increasingly high savings volume and savings rate, year after year, meant that China was accumulating vast sums of new wealth every year, and that too at a much faster rate of build-up. That's it. That is how China has managed to become an upper middle income nation and also one of the wealthiest nations in the world. That's it for today. If you want to learn more about the content in this video and learn the Chinese miracle in much more detail, dive into the newly launched The General Theory of Rapid Economic Development book. You'll find the link in the description below. Hit the thumbs up button if you like this video. Send your thoughts to me in the comments section below. Subscribe to this channel if you want to watch more quality content like this.